And this dilemma kind of keeps you glued to the screen. So, starting with a bit of theory, postmodernism is largely a reaction to the assumed certainty of scientific objective efforts to explain reality. In essence, it stems from a recognition that reality is not simply mirrored in human understanding of it, but rather is constructed as the mind tries to understand its own particular and personal reality. For this reason, postmodernism is highly skeptical of explanations which claim to be valid for all groups, cultures, traditions, races, and instead focus on the relative truth of each person. In postmodern understanding, interpretation is everything. Reality only comes into being through our interpretations of what the world means to us individually. Postmodernism relies on concrete experience over abstract principles, knowing always that the outcome of one's experiences will necessarily be fallible and relative, rather than certain and universal. The post in postmodern denies the existence of any ultimate principles and lacks the optimism of there being a scientific, philosophical, religious truth. And Richard Charnas explains, and I quote, postmodernism cannot on its own principles ultimately justify itself any more than can the various overviews against which the postmodern mind has defined itself. It had its origins way back, and Bishop talks about it in his book in 1996. Postmodern thinking arguably began in the 19th century with Nietzsche's assertion regarding truth, language, and society, which opened the door for all the later postmodern and late modern critiques about the foundations of the knowledge. And this is Kuznets. Nietzsche asserted that truth was simply a mobile army of metaphors, metonyms, anthropomorphisms, in short, a sum of human relations which have been enhanced, transported, embellished poetically and rhetorically, and which after long use seem firm, canonical, and obligatory to a people. Truths are illusions about which one has forgotten that this is what they are. Unquote, Nietzsche, 1954. So, let's have a very small, quick overview of modernity versus post-modernity. Modernity is the progressive economic, administrative rationalization and differentiation of the social world, unquote. In essence, this term emerged in the context of the development of the capitalist state. The fundamental act of modernity is to question the foundations of past knowledge. Boyne and Ratnansi characterize modernity as consisting of two sides, and I quote, the progressive union of scientific objectivity and politico-economic rationality mirrored in distributed visions of unelevated existential sphere. Unquote. Postmodernity is the state of condition of being postmodern. It means after, logically, it means after modernity. It refers to the incipient or actual dissolution of those social forms associated with modernity, unquote. Jan-François Lyotard, in his seminal work, The Postmodern Condition, 1984, defines it: incredulity towards meta-narratives, which is somewhat ironically a product of scientific progress. I'll explain meta-narratives when I come to both the movies. Postmodernity concentrates on the tensions of difference and similarity erupting from processes of globalization and capitalism, accelerating circulation of people, increasingly dense and frequent cross-cultural interactions, and the unavoidable interactions of local and global knowledge. Some social critics have attempted to explain the postmodern condition in terms of historical and social milieu, which spawned it. David Ashley suggests, and I quote, modern overloaded individuals. Again, one of the earlier speakers referred to it. There's an information overload as far as the internet is concerned. Modern overloaded individuals desperately trying to maintain rootedness and integrity ultimately are pushed to the point where there is little reason not to believe that all value orientations are equally well founded. Their increasingly, choice becomes meaningless. Unquote. Yavol, one of the most radical postmodernists, writes, and I quote, that come to terms with the second revolution, that of the 20th century of postmodernity, which is the immense process of destruction of meaning equal to the earlier destruction of appearances. And Sarup maintained, unquote, Sarup, and I quote, there is a sense in which if one sees modernism as the culture of modernity, postmodernism is the culture of postmodernity. Postmodernism is somewhat controversial, somewhat, I would say a lot controversial, because a lot of people doubt whether it can ever be dignified by conceptual coherence. However, in some sense, it is unified by a commitment to a set of cultural projects, privileging heterogeneity, fragmentation, and difference, as well as a relatively widespread mood in literary, theory, philosophy, and the social sciences that question the possibility of impartiality, objectivity, or authoritative knowledge. And this is Boyne and Ratansi. So Peter and Will Brooker in the book Postmodern After Images 1997, they say postmodernism has been an elastic and somewhat nomadic term, and I quite agree with that. Then Ihab Hassan, in his seminal work From Postmodernism to Postmodernity, the Local, the Global Context, says postmodernism is the return of the irrepressible. Like a ghost, it eludes definition. So now, let's talk about what postmodernist texts are. They are disjointed narratives, they offer altered realities, there is time bending, there is nostalgia, and there is a lot of oscillation between past and present in postmodernist work. Christopher Nolan's films are narrative, and now I come to what I wish to talk about, Nolan and his seminal movie. I can pick up Prestige, I can pick up Tenet, I can pick up the very latest 2023 Oppenheimer, which we recently went to watch on screen. I can pick up any number of movies of Nolan as postmodernist texts. Nolan's films are narratives of alternative realities and metamorphizing multiple subjectivities. As specimens of postmodernist filmic narratives, they dissolve the boundary between the rational and the fictional and perplex the audience with the spectacle of ambiguous experience. His films are polyphonic. Polyphonic, of course, there are a lot of sounds. And dialogic, and of course, the dialogues, which incorporate the fantasy of the dreams and the ambiguity of space or time. And as I mentioned, some of his very well-known movies, following 98, Memento, 2000, Insomnia, 2002, Batman Begins, 5, Prestige, 6, Dark Knight 8, Inception 10, and the list goes on. The Dark Knight Rises 12, Interstellar 14, 10 and 20, and of course, very Oppenheimer. Non-linear narrative structure, flashbacks, existential angst, and sociological ideas identify crisis and fragmented subjectivity. Self-deception, unreliability of the human memory, ambiguous endings, and morally ambiguous characters are the major characteristics of this film. Non-linear storytelling and flashbacks are employed in Memento, Batman Begins, Prestige, Interstellar, and Inception. Nolan's films have an urban setting with the protagonist on the run seeking redemption. The line between reality and fantasy is blurred in the films, which puts his protagonist in difficult situations. They often prefer fantasy to reality and become vulnerable to self-deception. The viewers also find it difficult to distinguish between fantasy and reality in his films. Nolan has tried to engage scientific, psychological, cultural issues in contemporary manner. His films question the concepts of reality and subjectivity and leave the viewers bewildered. His context, Nolan states, and I quote, I think the audience gets too comfortable and familiar in today's movies to believe everything that they are hearing and seeing. I like to shake that up. Unquote. This was published in USA Today. Obsession, deception, guilt often form the central theme of his. Now let's come to the interesting movies. The two very interesting movies, Memento and Interstellar. Both the films explore the wide range of possibilities of postmodern filmic narrative. The action of these films is related to the reliability of memory dream of the narrator and the protagonist narrator's inability to differentiate between reality and illusion. And a very quick get into Memento. Memento is the story of Leonard Shelby, Guy Pearce, a man suffering from anterograde amnesia, searching for his wife, Joanna Fox's murder. His thoughts and actions are incoherent like the fragmented narrative. The loss of memory causes uncertainty with respect to everything connected with the protagonist. It causes distortion of perception of time and space and makes him an outsider to culture and society. His perspectives are perpetually unstable and bring newer meanings to the world he perceives. This constant change of perspective keeps him dynamic as he does not remember previous changes. He is unaffected by different interpretations, which may also mislead him. The film is divided into two sequences, color and black and white. The black and white sequences are chronological and objective in nature. They have the voiceover of the protagonist for the perspective of the film. While the color sequences are subjective and are shown in reverse order. I would like to mention here, in one of the interviews, Christopher Nolan, ended up saying that mine is, referring to Memento, he said mine is not a linear, and he drew a line on the board, and he